"They're just humans." Korvek's last words echoed through the comms moments before the human ship tore through his cruiser. The silence that followed was deafening. What had been expected to be an easy hunt had now become a scene of disbelief. The galaxy had long known that humans were volatile, unpredictable, and dangerous, especially in packs. But a single ship? No one had ever lived to describe what humans were capable of when cornered. Turok, leader of the Krull bounty hunters, leaned forward in his command chair, sweat gathering at his brow. His eyes were glued to the scanner, where the human ship hovered just outside their weapons range. It had every chance to attack, but it hadn't. That in itself was unsettling. "Status report," Turok barked, his voice sharp with tension. "We've lost Korvek," replied Kel, the weapons officer. His voice was steady, but his twitching hands betrayed the anxiety surging through him. "There's no trace of his ship." "Scan the debris again," Turok ordered, his frustration palpable. "There has to be something left." The crew exchanged quick, uneasy glances. These were the best hunters the Krull had to offer, a squad known for their speed, stealth, and their ability to take down beasts 10 times the size of this human ship. Yet here they were, hesitant, unnerved. The tension was suffocating. Turok felt his neck muscles tighten, the stress compressing like a vice. "That human vessel," he growled to himself, "it's playing with us." But they wouldn't give the humans the satisfaction. "Not yet." "Sir, I think it's moving." Kale's voice cut through the tense silence. Turok snapped his gaze back to the scanner. Slowly, deliberately, the human ship began to drift forward. It moved like a predator stalking its prey, silent and undetectable. Unlike the roaring, intimidating presence of Krull ships, this human vessel made no sound. No lights, no warning, just the ominous stillness of an enemy too confident to fear detection. "Prepare to engage," Turok ordered, his voice sharp. The Krull ships immediately sprang into formation, stealth systems engaged, forming a tight semicircle around the human ship. This was their moment. "On my mark," Turok growled, hands gripping his controls tightly. "Fire!" A barrage of plasma bolts lit up the dark void of space, bright arcs of deadly energy streaking toward the human ship. But then, nothing. The plasma shots disappeared into the void, missing their target entirely. Turok's eyes darted to the scanner. The human ship had vanished. "Where is it?" Turok shouted, panic creeping into his voice, once so full of confidence. Before anyone could answer, the Krull cruiser to his left exploded in a massive flash of light. The blast sent a shockwave through Turok's ship, throwing him against the control console. Sparks flew from the panels, alarms blaring as smoke filled the air. "They're hunting us," Kel muttered, wide-eyed as the realization set in. Turok's heart raced. This couldn't be happening. No species had ever out-hunted the Krull, but these humans, they weren't like any species they had ever faced. The stories about humanity, the warnings they had arrogantly ignored, were suddenly all too real. "Regroup," Turok commanded, his voice strained. "We have to move together. We can't take them alone." The remaining Krull ships, flickering in and out of cloak, formed up again. They were no longer hunters. They were running, trying to escape from an enemy faster and far more deadly. But the human ship pursued them relentlessly, closing the distance with terrifying speed. It was clear now, the Krull weren't hunting humans. The humans were hunting them. "It's toying with us," Kel whispered, his voice barely audible above the alarms. "Not for long," Turok snapped, though the panic was evident in his own voice. He ordered the ships to prepare for one last stand. But the humans had other plans. Without warning, another Krull ship erupted in flames, disappearing from the scanner as the human vessel's cannons fired with surgical precision. The humans weren't just faster, they were smarter. Every move the Krull made, the humans anticipated and countered. "We have to disappear," Turok ordered, his voice now edged with desperation. "Jam their sensors. Cut all non-essential systems. We go dark." The crew hesitated, but followed orders. The ship's lights dimmed, the hum of machinery faded, and soon, they were drifting silently through space, blind and invisible. But so was the human ship, if the plan worked. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The bridge was silent, the crew barely breathing. Turok's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. The humans were watching their every move, tracking their heat signatures, and anticipating their tactics. "They're overconfident," Turok muttered to himself. "They think we're done." It was in that overconfidence, he realized, that their opportunity lay. The human ship was circling back, slower this time, scanning the void where they once were. It was being cautious, too cautious. "We're going to attack," Turok said, his voice resolute. The crew exchanged incredulous looks. One battered crawl ship against a human vessel that had already decimated their fleet? It was madness. But Turok was calm, his voice unwavering. "We make them come to us," he said. "We strike when they think they've won." The human ship hovered nearby, its scanners sweeping the void. When it finally came within striking distance, Turok gave the order. The crawl ship roared back to life, its plasma cannons blazing in a surprise attack. The human ship, caught off guard, took the brunt of the assault. Its shields flickered, its hull sparking as it spun out of control. For the first time, the crawl had the upper hand. But the human vessel wasn't done. It shot forward in a burst of speed, positioning itself behind the crawl ship and firing with brutal accuracy. The crawl ship shuddered under the impact, systems failing, consoles exploding as sparks rained down on the crew. Turok gritted his teeth. They had been so close. "Divert everything to engines," he ordered. One final plan. One last gamble. Turok saw it, a gap in the human ship's defenses. "Target their engines," he whispered. With a final desperate volley of plasma, they struck the human vessel's engines, crippling it. But even as it drifted in space, flickering, Turok knew it wasn't over. The humans had fought not because they feared the crawl, but to protect something. They fought for each other. And in the end, Turok realized too late, that was something no amount of hunting could ever break. The human ship appeared out of nowhere, cutting through the vast emptiness of space like a predator stalking its prey. Its cannons fired with deadly precision, each shot hitting its mark. One by one, crawl ships went dark, their hulking forms disappearing into the cold void. Turok's breath quickened, his chest heaving as the realization sank in, there was no escape. "They're toying with us," Kel whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms blaring through the ship. His wide eyes were filled with dread as he watched the human vessel effortlessly dismantle their fleet. Turok narrowed his eyes, his jaw clenched in determination. He had led countless hunts, fought against the fiercest creatures across the galaxy, and survived battles that would have broken lesser warriors. But this was different. The humans weren't just hunting them. They were playing with them, mocking them. "Not for long," Turok growled, slamming his fist onto the comms panel. "All ships, prepare for one last strike. We go down fighting." The crawl ships, battered and limping, pivoted in unison, their weapons charging for a final assault. Turok's eyes locked onto the human vessel, his fingers hovering over the fire button. This was their last stand. They had no other choice. "Fire!" he roared. The ship's cannons erupted, releasing a blinding flash of energy. A wall of plasma hurtled toward the human ship, lighting up the darkness of space. But just as before, the human vessel vanished without a trace. The plasma bolts sailed through empty space, missing their target entirely. Turok barely had time to react before his ship shook violently. Something had struck them from behind. Systems overloaded, and the consoles around him flickered before the lights dimmed. Alarms screeched as sparks flew from the damaged panels. His heart raced as the ship systems failed one by one. The scanner showed nothing but static, and the once organized formation of crawl hunters was now in disarray. The last thing Turok saw before the lights cut out completely was the shadow of the human ship closing in, silent and menacing. They had underestimated the humans. He had underestimated them. Now, they were no longer the hunters, they were the hunted. "Where's the honor in this?" Try's voice crackled through the comms, hoarse and filled with frustration. The crawl were warriors, hunters of renown, feared across the galaxy. And yet, here they were, scattered and cornered, their numbers dwindling fast. Every ship they lost felt like a piece of their pride being stripped away. "We've lost 5 ships, sir," Kel reported, his hands trembling as they hovered over the controls. His eyes, once steady and sharp, now betrayed fear. They were fighting a losing battle. Turok wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind racing. They couldn't keep fighting like this. The human ship wasn't just faster, it was smarter. Every move they made, the humans anticipated. Every tactic they tried, the humans countered. The crawl couldn't outgun them, and they couldn't outrun them. "Turn everything we have toward jamming their sensors," Turok ordered, though his voice wavered. He had to keep the crew focused, but even he knew how desperate the situation was becoming. Kel hesitated. "But if we jam their sensors, they won't see us, and we won't see them either." Turok cut him off, his gaze hard. "It's our only shot." Kel nodded reluctantly, his fingers flying across the controls as he initiated the jamming sequence. The ship systems hummed to life, emitting waves of interference. The scanner went dark, and the crew was plunged into a tense, unsettling silence. They were blind now, drifting in the dark, waiting for the human ship to strike again. If the plan worked, the human vessel would be blind too. For a long, excruciating moment, there was nothing but silence. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Every second stretched into an eternity as they waited for the humans to make their move. Turok's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to find a way out of this nightmare. "We need a plan," Kel muttered under his breath, his hands twitching as he stared at the blank screens. Turok didn't respond. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. They couldn't win this. Every move they made, the humans seemed to know in advance. Every strategy the crawl used, the humans countered. It was as if they were always one step ahead. And then, suddenly, it hit him. "They're watching us," Turok whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with the weight of realization. Kel looked confused. "How? We're cloaked. They can't see us." Turok's eyes narrowed as he pieced it together. "Not with their eyes. They're reading our heat signatures, tracking our power output, watching for any disturbance in space." His voice grew darker. "We're not invisible to them. We're just predictable." Kel's face paled as the truth sank in. Their cloaking wasn't fooling the humans. The humans weren't relying on traditional sight, they were using other means to track them. The crawl had been playing by old rules, but the humans were on an entirely different level. Turok leaned forward, his mind whirling with a new sense of purpose. If the humans were watching their every move, then they had to break the pattern. They had to do something the humans wouldn't expect. Something chaotic. "Cut all non-essential systems," Turok ordered, his voice low but firm. "Go dark. Completely." Kel exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed without question. The lights dimmed further, the hum of the engines reduced to a faint whisper. The ship was now a ghost, barely detectable. But Turok knew the humans would still be watching for them. "We're going to make them come to us," Turok said, a spark of defiance lighting up his eyes. "And when they think they've won, that's when we strike." The plan was dangerous, risky even. They were still blind, and the humans could outmaneuver them again. But if they could break free from their predictable patterns, if they could lure the humans in close enough, they might have a chance. Turok took a deep breath, his mind steady now. He wasn't sure if they would survive this. But one thing was certain, they would go down fighting. "Cut all non-essential systems. We're going dark. Full power to life support and engines. Everything else stays offline." Turok's voice was firm, leaving no room for dissent. The crew hesitated for a moment, exchanging anxious glances, but eventually complied with his orders. The ship's lights dimmed, and the usual hum of machinery faded away until only the soft whir of life support remained. They drifted in the vast emptiness of space, silent and invisible, waiting for whatever came next. Seconds ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity, and then minutes slipped away in the heavy stillness. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Turok clenched his fists, his eyes locked on the dark screen before him, his mind racing. No movement. No noise. "They hold position," TK whispered, his voice barely rising above the quiet. "They'll come looking for us." The crew barely breathed, their hearts pounding in their chests. Time stretched out painfully as they waited, every second becoming a nerve-wracking reminder of their precarious situation. Turok strained his ears, listening intently for any sign of the enemy ship's approach. His mind replayed the events that had led them to this moment, each mistake flashing through his thoughts like a slideshow of failures. The humans had outthought them at every turn, and the weight of that failure pressed down on him like a physical burden. But now, things were different. They were hunting blind, and he had the advantage. Still, nothing stirred in the void. "Kel," Turok murmured, his voice steady despite the tension. "Gee, let them make the next move," Kel replied quietly, his eyes flicking between the sensors and the dark void beyond the ship's hull. D vanished from the human ship sensors, but for how long? Suddenly, a faint blip appeared on the radar, a ripple in the vast blackness. Try's heart quickened. The human ship had re-engaged, probing the area, searching for them. "They're scanning the sector," Kel whispered, his voice tense. "Slow and steady," Turok instructed, his gaze narrowing as he analyzed the blip. "They're cautious. They think we've got a trick up our sleeve, and we don't." Kel's brow furrowed. "Are you sure?" Turok allowed himself a brief smile, the tension in his chest easing just a little. The blip on the radar moved, sweeping through the void methodically. "Steady," TK said through gritted teeth, the crew tensing as the human ship passed within striking distance. Its sensors washed over them like a spotlight, and for a moment, Turok feared they had been detected. But the human ship continued on, oblivious to their presence. "They missed us," Kel exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. But Turok didn't share that feeling. He knew it wouldn't last. Not for long. Kale's fingers hovered over the controls, reigniting the ship systems without raising alarms. Turok's mind raced as he scanned the ship's limited tactical options. They were running out of time, out of ships, and out of everything. And then it hit him again. "They're overconfident," Turok muttered, more to himself than the crew. "They think they've broken us. They're too cautious now, too careful." Kel glanced at him, a spark of understanding igniting in his eyes. "And that's our advantage." Turok nodded slowly, feeling a surge of determination. "They're expecting us to keep running. But what if we stop running?" Kel blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Turok's eyes gleamed with newfound resolve. "We're going to attack." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, uncertainty written on their faces. It was madness, one damaged crawl ship against a human vessel that had already decimated their fleet. But Turok's voice held no uncertainty, his resolve shining through. "They've been watching us, reading our movements," he explained, his tone calm but insistent. "But now we know how they think. We make them come to us." Kel hesitated for a moment, the fear evident in his eyes, before giving a sharp nod. "We go silent again. Wait for them to circle back." Turok felt a fierce determination settle in his chest. "But this time, when they find us, we hit them hard. Full power, everything we've got." Kel's expression darkened as he warned, "They'll see it coming." "Not if we time it right," Turok countered, his confidence growing. "They'll think they have us cornered. And that's when we'll strike." As the crew prepared for the imminent confrontation, Turok's mind raced with possibilities. The human ship was underestimating them, and he intended to use that to their advantage. They had to take the fight to the humans, to show them that the Crawl were not just prey but predators capable of ferocity and cunning. "Get ready," Turok commanded, his voice steady. "When they come back, we'll unleash everything we have. No holding back." He could feel the energy in the air shift, a palpable tension as the crew readied themselves for the fight ahead. They were no longer just waiting. They were preparing to reclaim their dignity, to show the galaxy that they were still a force to be reckoned with. As they drifted silently in the void, the anticipation built within him. Each heartbeat echoed in his ears, each moment a reminder of the stakes at hand. They were outnumbered and outmatched, but they still had their wits, and Turok intended to make every second count. He glanced at his crew, their faces etched with resolve, and felt a surge of pride. They were Crawl, fierce and unyielding. They would not go quietly into the dark. They would fight, and they would show the humans the true meaning of fear. "We'll turn the tables on them," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "This time, they'll be the ones caught off guard." With their hearts racing and minds focused, the crew readied themselves for what was to come. The shadows of the universe loomed around them, but within the darkness, a new plan took shape. They would emerge from the void, claws bared, and show the humans that they were far from finished. The hunt would begin anew, but this time, the crawl would be the hunters. Cornered us, and that's when we strike. Turok's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Kel stared at him for a moment, gauging the gravity of their situation, and then set his jaw, steeling himself for what was to come. The crew moved silently, each member focused on preparing the ship for its final stand. Turok could sense the urgency in the air, a collective resolve that surged through the vessel. Trick watched the radar intently, his heart pounding in rhythm with the ticking seconds. The human ship was circling back, and this time, it was slower, more deliberate. Turok could feel the vibrations in his chest. They were right on top of them now. "They're right on top of us," Kel whispered, his voice barely a breath. Turok held up a hand, signaling for silence as the human ship hovered nearby, its engines humming softly. The scanners swept the darkness, probing for any sign of their presence. It was searching, hunting them like prey, and Turok knew they had to act before it was too late. "Now," he commanded, and the ship roared to life. The engines fired at full throttle, the vibrations pulsating through the crew as adrenaline surged. The weapon systems powered up with a heavy thrum, and the plasma cannons blazed to life, unleashing a concentrated burst of energy. The human ship, caught off guard by the sudden assault, swerved to avoid the onslaught, but it was too late. The crawl ship's plasma cannon void. Turok didn't let up. He poured every ounce of energy into the attack, his ship systems burning red-hot as they unleashed a heavy barrage of fire. "Keep firing!" Turok shouted, his voice a rallying cry. Kel grinned, fingers flying over the controls with practiced precision. The human ship shuddered under the relentless assault, its shields flickering as sparks flew from its hull. For the first time, they had the upper hand. "We're breaking through!" Kel yelled, his eyes wide with excitement. Turok's heart raced with exhilaration. If they could maintain this momentum, they might actually win. But the human ship wasn't finished yet. With a sudden burst of speed, it shot forward, dodging the last volley of plasma fire with alarming agility. In an instant, it was behind them, its cannons glowing bright. "Evasive maneuvers!" Turok barked, the urgency in his voice rising. The crawl ship lurched to the side, but the human vessel was faster. Its weapons fired, slamming into their shields with brutal force. Sparks flew from the consoles, and the ship buckled under the impact, the sound echoing ominously through the bridge. "We're losing power!" Cale shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Turok gritted his teeth, hands shaking as he fought to keep the ship under control. They had been so close to victory, but now the human ship was back in command, and it wasn't playing games anymore. "Divert everything to engines," Trick ordered, desperation tightening his voice. "We're not done yet." S slammed into the human vessel, sending it spinning through the void. Turok didn't let up. He poured every ounce of energy into the attack, his ship systems burning red-hot as they unleashed a heavy barrage of fire. "Keep firing!" Turok shouted, his voice a rallying cry. Kel grinned, fingers flying over the controls with practiced precision. The human ship shuddered under the relentless assault, its shields flickering as sparks flew from its hull. For the first time, they had the upper hand. "We're breaking through!" Kel yelled, his eyes wide with excitement. Turok's heart raced with exhilaration. If they could maintain this momentum, they might actually win. But the human ship wasn't finished yet. With a sudden burst of speed, it shot forward, dodging the last volley of plasma fire with alarming agility. In an instant, it was behind them, its cannons glowing bright. "Evasive maneuvers!" Turok barked, the urgency in his voice rising. The crawl ship lurched to the side, but the human vessel was faster. Its weapons fired, slamming into their shields with brutal force. Sparks flew from the consoles, and the ship buckled under the impact, the sound echoing ominously through the bridge. "We're losing power!" Cale shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Turok gritted his teeth, hands shaking as he fought to keep the ship under control. They had been so close to victory, But now the human ship was back in command, and it wasn't playing games anymore. "Divert everything to engines," Trick ordered, desperation tightening his voice. "We're not done yet." The ship systems groaned in protest as the engines flared, pushing the crawl vessel to its limits. Turok's eyes locked onto the human ship, his mind racing for a plan, any plan. Then he saw it, a gap in the human ship's defenses, a small opening near its engines. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. "Kel, target their engines," Turok commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. Kel didn't hesitate, his fingers flying across the controls as he locked onto the human ship's weak spot. "Firing now." Turok's heart raced. "Fire," he whispered, the words slipping past his lips like a prayer. The plasma cannons erupted in a final burst of energy, streaking toward the human vessel's engines. Turok held his breath as the bolts closed in, the tension unbearable. And then, with a flash of light, they struck. The human ship shuddered violently, its engine sputtering as the plasma bolts tore through its hull. For a moment, it hung in space, crippled and vulnerable. Turok exhaled, his chest heaving with the weight of what they had accomplished. They had done it. They had finally struck a blow against their relentless adversary. But the victory was short-lived. Turok's relief was fleeting, a mere flicker in the face of impending doom. The human ship, though damaged, was far from defeated. A low rumble reverberated through the crawl vessel, and Turok's instincts screamed at him to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. "Ready for anything," he shouted, his voice rising above the alarms. The crew tightened their grips on their controls, adrenaline flooding their systems as they braced for what was to come. From the shadows, the human ship retaliated, its cannons roaring to life again. The crawl crew had succeeded in wounding their foe, but it would not end quietly. Turok's heart raced anew as the human vessel, despite its damaged state, maneuvered with uncanny precision, its engines roaring back to life. "Prepare for impact," Kel shouted, his face a mask of determination. Turok felt the ship shudder as the human vessel unleashed its fury. He fought to maintain control, dodging and weaving through the chaos as their enemies' weapons lit up the dark expanse of space. "Divert all power to shields," Turok commanded, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "Power diverted," Kel reported, sweat beading on his brow as he monitored the systems. As the human ship continued its assault, Turok could feel the weight of every decision bearing down on him. They were fighting not just for their survival but for their very identity as hunters. "Stay focused," Turok urged his crew, sensing the determination that flickered among them. They were not just a ship, they were a legacy of crawl hunters, forged in battles and sharpened by trials. The human ship surged forward, intent on finishing what it had started. Turok's instincts kicked in, and he urged his crew to brace for the next attack. They had to hold their ground and fight back, for the pride of the crawl depended on it. "Prepare for a counterstrike," Turok yelled, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he prepared to unleash the full might of their vessel once more. The tension in the air was electric, charged with the anticipation of a battle that had become a desperate dance between predator and prey. The stakes were higher than ever, and Turok was ready to show the universe that the crawl would not go down without a fight. With every ounce of determination fueling him, Turok faced the challenge head-on, ready to reclaim their fate in the vast emptiness of space. The fight for survival had just begun, and he would not falter. The crawl would rise again, and they would make their mark against the humans who dared to challenge them. The human ship, though crippled, was far from finished. It drifted aimlessly in the void of space, its lights flickering like the last embers of a dying star. Yet Turok knew better than to underestimate the tenacity of humanity. They had proven themselves formidable opponents, and he felt the weight of that reality pressing heavily on his shoulders. "We've got a window," Kel muttered, wiping sweat from his brow as he scanned the chaotic battlefield around them. But the urgency in his Turok stood rigid at the console, his eyes fixed on the wreckage floating in the blackness. The human ship was fast recovering, quicker than anything he had seen in his many years as a bounty hunter. It was an unnerving sight. The ship systems, despite their damage, were coming back online with alarming speed. "They're repairing the ship," Kel warned, panic creeping into his voice. "We finish this now," Turok said, his tone cold and measured, betraying none of the tension building inside him. The crew scrambled to prepare for one last strike. Turok's mind raced, calculating the risks. They had hit the human ship's engines, a significant blow, but their own systems were barely holding together. Another direct engagement could spell their doom. Yet, there was no alternative. He had to take the bring us about. Turok ordered, tightening his grip on the console. "Maximum speed. Aim for their bridge." Kel hesitated, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're suggesting a direct attack? They'll see it coming." "SK." Voice hinted at the fleeting nature of their opportunity. "They will," Turok agreed, "but they won't expect us to ram them." Kel's eyes widened further, realizing the depth of the plan. "That's suicide." Turok clenched his jaw, his resolve hardening. They had come too far to turn back now. The crawl ship powered up its engines, straining under the load. The crew moved with a sense of urgency, preparing for the final assault. The human ship, still sputtering but operational, hovered just ahead, struggling to regain its systems. "Weapons are online," Kel announced, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "One shot is all we need," Turok muttered, his focus sharpening as the ship surged forward, closing the distance to the human vessel. His heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to pull back, to retreat into the safety of the shadows. But there was no turning back now. They were hunters, and it was time to finish the hunt. As they closed in, the human ship's guns flared to life, unleashing a volley of energy blasts that streaked toward them. Turok jerked the controls, narrowly dodging the first barrage by mere inches. Sparks flew as another shot grazed the hull, but they pressed on, charging headlong into the fight. "Steady!" Turok growled, his eyes fixed on the target. The human ship loomed larger, its cannons blazing, but its movements were slower, more erratic. Turok could feel the pressure mounting, the heat of the moment pushing him to the brink of decision. They were seconds away from their confrontation, and the window was closing rapidly. "Now!" Turok shouted, galvanizing his crew into action. The crawl ship unleashed its full arsenal, every remaining plasma cannon firing in a blinding barrage of energy. The human ship, caught mid-repair, took the brunt of the assault head-on. Its shields flickered and then collapsed entirely under the force of the onslaught. The blasts tore into its hull, ripping through the outer layers of armor and sending debris spiraling into the void of space. But even as the human vessel crumbled, it returned fire. Its cannons spewed energy with deadly accuracy, the brilliant flashes lighting up the dark expanse of space. The crawl ship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring as systems overloaded. Sparks rained down from the consoles, and the crew fought desperately to maintain control amidst the chaos. "We're not going to make it," Kel shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony surrounding them. "Hold course." Turok gritted his teeth, determination fueling his resolve. The human ship's bridge was now in sight, its structure weakened and exposed. Turok could see the damage they had inflicted, the ruptured hull, sparking wires, and twisted metal. It was hanging by a thread, and they were the scissors that would cut it. As they closed in on the bridge, the crawl ship strained against the damage it had sustained. Turok could feel the vibrations in the hull, the groans of metal protesting under pressure. But there was no time for hesitation, no room for doubt. The moment of reckoning was upon them, and he had to see it through to the end. "Prepare to fire everything we have," Turok commanded, his voice a steady anchor amid the turmoil. The crew scrambled to comply, adrenaline coursing through their veins. They were all too aware of the stakes, the survival of their ship, the legacy of the crawl, and their very lives depended on this single moment. The distance closed, and Turok's heart raced. He could almost taste victory in the air, but he knew it would come at a cost. With a final surge of energy, they readied themselves for the impact, the culmination of their relentless pursuit. "Now!" Turok shouted, the command echoing in the silence before the storm. They were committed, and the human ship was vulnerable. The Krull vessel hurtled forward, determined to strike the final blow. Turok's gaze never wavered from the bridge, and in that moment, he felt the weight of the galaxy upon him. Time slowed as they approached, and he held on to that fleeting hope, knowing that victory was within their grasp. But even as they surged forward, Turok could sense the inevitability of fate. They would either emerge victorious or meet their end, but they would do so as hunters, proud and unyielding. With every ounce of strength, Turok steeled himself for the confrontation ahead. The final strike was upon them, and nothing would stand in their way. In the depths of space, amidst the swirling chaos of war, the Krull would leave their mark, and Turok would ensure they did not go quietly into the night. In a desperate push, the Krull ship slammed into the human vessel with catastrophic force. The impact was a violent collision of metal, tearing and exploding as the two ships engaged in a fiery embrace that lit up the darkness of space. Turok was thrown from his seat, the sheer force of the crash sending him sprawling across the deck. For a moment, everything went dark, the sounds of battle, the blaring alarms, the chaos, they all faded into a haunting silence. When he regained consciousness, his vision was blurred, and his head throbbed painfully. Turok forced himself to his feet, every muscle in his body protesting against the effort. The bridge was a shambles. Sparks rained down from the ceiling like angry fireflies, and flames raged along the walls, consuming everything they touched. "Kel!" Turok called out, his voice hoarse and barely audible over the crackling of the fires and the hissing of damaged systems. He coughed through the smoke, his throat burning. There was no response, only the deafening silence of a bridge in chaos. Staggering toward the console, he used it for support, his hands shaking as he pulled himself upright. The ship's systems were failing. He could see the readings flashing ominously on the screen, engines offline, weapons disabled. They were dead in the water, a drifting hulk in the void of space. But as Turok forced himself to gaze out through the cracked viewport, a flicker of grim satisfaction washed over him. The human ship was worse off than theirs. It was a ruin, its bridge torn apart, flames licking at the shattered remains. They had done it. But at what cost? Turok collapsed into the captain's chair, his body aching, and his mind numb from the chaos. The crew was gone, their lives extinguished in an instant. The ship was crippled, and the hollow feeling of victory settled over him like a heavy shroud. Yes, they had outsmarted the humans. Yes, they had outlasted them in a battle that felt like an eternity. But it wasn't the triumph he had expected. It wasn't the glorious victory he had dreamed of when he set out on this mission. As the silence settled around him, Turok realized something profound. The humans, for all their power and cunning, had fought like they had nothing to lose. They had pursued the Krull not out of fear, but from an unyielding determination to end the threat posed by Turok and his kind. "They weren't hunting us," he muttered to himself, the truth dawning on him like the first light of dawn breaking through a long night. "They were protecting something." The thought lingered in his mind, gnawing at him like an insatiable hunger. The human ship drifted in space, broken and beaten, yet in its own way, it had won. It had forced them into desperation and madness, and in doing so, it had revealed a truth that Turok had never considered. Humans weren't feared because they were powerful. They were feared because they fought for something greater than mere survival. They fought for each other, for their families, their friends, their very way of life. Turok closed his eyes, letting the darkness envelop him as thoughts raced through his mind. The Krull had underestimated humanity, not because of their advanced ships or superior weapons, but because of their unyielding will to protect what they held dear. In the end, it wasn't the technology or tactics that had won the battle. It was the indomitable human spirit, their will to fight even when all seemed lost. As realization washed over him, Turok understood too late that this was a lesson he should have grasped earlier. No amount of hunting, no strategies honed over years of conflict, could ever break the bond that humans shared with one another. They were driven by something profound, something that gave them the strength to rise even when faced with insurmountable odds. As the last flickering light in the bridge dimmed, Turok whispered into the void, his voice barely audible. "Humanity, we were wrong about you." And then there was silence, an all-encompassing stillness that felt both like an ending and a beginning. The darkness wrapped around him, and in that moment of finality, Turok understood that true power lay not in domination or fear, but in the connections forged between souls willing to fight for each other, even in the direst of circumstances. He let the silence wash over him, knowing he had witnessed a truth that would linger long after the battle was forgotten.